Chosen one. Every environment you enter carries a set of expectations that are rarely written down and almost never openly discussed. These expectations form what can only be described as invisible rules. They operate quietly beneath the surface of workplaces, social circles, communities, and even families. No one announces them, yet everyone seems to understand them instinctively. They determine who is accepted, who is ignored, and who suddenly becomes a problem. Most people follow these rules without thinking, because doing so keeps life comfortable. It allows them to blend into the group without drawing attention. But the chosen one often discovers something different. Without even trying, you begin violating these silent expectations, simply by choosing honesty over convenience, truth over silence, and integrity over conformity. And the moment that happens, something shifts in the environment around you. Suddenly, the attention that once passed over you begins focusing directly on you. The system reacts, not because you attacked it, but because you disrupted it. These invisible rules often protect patterns that the group depends on to maintain stability. They might require people to ignore wrongdoing so that no one feels uncomfortable. They may encourage silence when unfair behavior occurs, because speaking up would disturb the peace. Sometimes they reward agreement, even when the majority is clearly wrong, because unity is valued more than truth. In these environments, loyalty to the system becomes more important than integrity. Most people learn to navigate these dynamics quietly, understanding that questioning them can lead to tension or rejection. But the chosen one often struggles with these expectations because something inside refuses to pretend that dishonesty is normal. You may notice inconsistencies that others ignore. You may feel uncomfortable participating in conversations built on gossip or manipulation. You may hesitate when everyone else agrees to something that clearly violates your sense of fairness. In those moments, you are not intentionally rebelling. You are simply being authentic. Yet authenticity, in an environment built on silent compromise, becomes disruptive. The system depends on everyone cooperating with the unspoken rules. When someone refuses to participate, even quietly, it creates friction. The chosen one may not realize this immediately. At first, the reaction from others can feel confusing. You might notice subtle changes in how people respond to you. Conversations may become tense when you raise certain questions. Some individuals may begin interpreting your honesty as criticism, even when you had no intention of confronting anyone. Over time, you begin sensing that something about your presence makes certain people uncomfortable. This discomfort does not come from anything you said directly. It comes from the simple fact that you are not playing by the rules everyone else silently agreed to follow. In many environments, systems survive through cooperation with these invisible expectations. People protect the group dynamic by avoiding topics that expose uncomfortable truths. They maintain stability by discouraging anyone who threatens to disrupt the pattern. When the chosen one enters that space and begins acting according to their conscience rather than the system's expectations, the balance begins to shift. Suddenly, your behavior becomes noticeable. Others may begin asking why you are not participating in the same patterns they follow. They may label your independence as stubbornness or arrogance. Yet, the reality is much simpler. You are living according to truth rather than pressure. Scripture often shows that those who walk closely with God naturally disrupt systems that depend on compromise. This disruption rarely begins with confrontation. It begins with quiet integrity. When someone chooses honesty instead of silence, it reveals the cracks in environments that rely on secrecy. When someone refuses to participate in manipulation, it weakens systems built on control. When someone prioritizes truth over approval, it exposes how fragile approval-based systems truly are. The chosen one does not necessarily set out to challenge these structures, but by living according to God's principles rather than human expectations, you naturally become a contrast to the environment around you. Over time, the reactions from others begin making more sense. The tension you experience is not random hostility. It is the system responding to disruption. People who benefit from the unspoken rules may feel threatened by anyone who refuses to follow them. Instead of questioning the system itself, they often redirect attention toward the person who disturbed it. And that is when the chosen one begins realizing that the conflict was never about personal disagreements. It began the moment you broke rules that were never meant to be questioned. But what those systems fail to understand is that the strength of the chosen one does not come from their willingness to conform. It comes from their willingness to stand in truth, even when the environment expects silence. God did not call his people to operate according to hidden compromises designed to protect human systems. He called them to live by integrity, even when that integrity quietly exposes patterns that others would rather keep hidden. Chosen one. Once you begin recognizing that invisible rules exist within many environments, another realization soon follows. Your presence alone can begin exposing the system that depends on those rules. You may believe that you are simply living according to your conscience, making decisions based on honesty, fairness, and the standards you feel God has placed in your heart. But to the people around you who benefit from the existing structure, your integrity does something unexpected. It acts like a mirror. It reflects patterns they would rather not examine. Integrity has a quiet but powerful effect on environments built on compromise. When most people cooperate with silent expectations, the system functions smoothly because no one questions it. Conversations stay comfortable because no one challenges the narrative. Decisions move forward without resistance because everyone plays the role expected of them. But the moment someone refuses to participate in the pattern, the illusion of stability begins to crack. The chosen one often disrupts this balance without even intending to, by asking honest questions, by refusing to repeat gossip, by declining to participate in unfair behavior. You introduce a different standard into the environment. Suddenly, the contrast becomes visible. People who were comfortable before may begin feeling uneasy around you, not because you attacked them, but because your actions reveal that another way of operating is possible. This is why integrity often creates tension in systems built on hidden compromise. When someone lives according to truth, it removes the comfort others find in pretending everything is acceptable. Instead of addressing the behavior that created the discomfort, people sometimes respond by shifting attention toward the person who revealed it. The chosen one becomes labeled with words that attempt to explain away the disruption. You may be called difficult, stubborn, or overly serious. Some may say you are creating unnecessary conflict when you simply refuse to ignore something that feels wrong. Others may describe you as different or rebellious because you will not quietly accept the same compromises they accepted long ago. These labels rarely reflect reality. They are often attempts to protect the system from being questioned. When people rely on a certain structure to maintain their comfort or authority, any challenge to that structure feels threatening. Instead of examining the rules themselves, it becomes easier to frame the chosen one as the problem. This reaction can be confusing if you are not aware of how systems operate. You may spend time wondering why your honesty seems to create tension where you expected respect. You may question whether you should simply stay silent to avoid conflict. But the deeper truth is that integrity always reveals something. It exposes the difference between environments built on truth and environments built on convenience. For people who benefit from the existing arrangement, this exposure can feel like a threat. The chosen one often carries a sense of independence that makes this effect even stronger. When you are not dependent on the approval of the group for your identity, you become harder to control through social pressure. Systems that rely on conformity often depend on subtle forms of influence. People learn what is acceptable by observing how others react to behavior that challenges the norm. When someone breaks those expectations and continues standing confidently, it sends a signal that the rules are not as absolute as they once appeared. That realization alone can destabilize the system. Instead of admitting that the rules themselves may be flawed, some individuals react by focusing on the chosen one. They begin interpreting your independence as defiance. They may claim that your refusal to participate is disrespectful to the group. But beneath those accusations lies a deeper discomfort. Your presence reminds them that they had the same choice you made. They could have refused the silent rules as well. The difference is that you chose integrity while they chose accommodation. Scripture describes this dynamic in a simple but powerful way when it explains that light exposes darkness. Light does not attack darkness directly. It simply reveals what is already there. When someone begins living in truth, the contrast makes hidden patterns visible. For those who depend on secrecy or compromise, that visibility can feel threatening. The chosen one becomes the person associated with the exposure, even though the real issue existed long before you arrived. Understanding this dynamic changes how you interpret the reactions you receive. Instead of seeing every criticism as a personal failure, you begin recognizing it as evidence of the system responding to disruption. Your integrity is not creating the problem, it is revealing it. The discomfort others feel is not caused by your presence alone, but by the contrast between the standards you follow and the compromises they have normalized. When the chosen one understands this, it becomes easier to remain steady. You stop trying to convince everyone to see things the same way you do. You realize that your responsibility is not to maintain the system's comfort, but to remain aligned with truth. God did not call you to protect environments that depend on hidden compromise. He called you to live with integrity. Even when that integrity quietly exposes patterns others would rather keep hidden. Chosen one. Once the invisible rules of a system have been disrupted and the contrast created by your integrity becomes visible, the environment often reacts in ways that can feel confusing at first. What once seemed like ordinary interaction begins to change. Conversations that were once neutral carry a different tone. Certain individuals begin watching you more closely. Subtle shifts in attitude appear where there was once simple indifference. This stage of the journey can be one of the most difficult for the chosen one, because the tension rarely begins with open confrontation. Instead, the system responds quietly, attempting to restore the balance that existed before your presence disturbed it. Groups that operate through unspoken rules often protect themselves by isolating the person who disrupted the pattern. It becomes easier for them to redirect attention toward the individual rather than confront the weaknesses in the structure itself. Slowly, small criticisms may begin appearing. They may not sound dramatic at first. A comment about your attitude here, a question about your motives there. These remarks can feel subtle, almost casual, but over time they create a narrative. The chosen one may begin noticing that certain people interpret your actions differently than they did before. Where you once saw normal interactions, others now seem to see conflict. Where you believed you were simply being honest, they describe you as disruptive. This shift often leads to confusion because the chosen one may not understand why the atmosphere has changed so suddenly. You might look back at your actions and struggle to find the moment when everything became tense. But the truth is that the tension did not begin with a specific incident. It began the moment the system recognized that its unspoken rules were no longer being followed automatically. When the stability of a group depends on silent cooperation, even a small disruption can create a ripple effect. People who benefited from the system may begin feeling that their influence or comfort is threatened. Instead of addressing the deeper issue, the group instinctively attempts to restore the old balance. One of the most common ways this happens is through subtle forms of exclusion. Invitations may become less frequent. Conversations may happen without your knowledge. Decisions may be made in spaces where your voice is no longer included. These actions are rarely announced directly. Instead, they unfold quietly, leaving the chosen one wondering why the atmosphere suddenly feels different. Alongside exclusion, another pattern often appears. The chosen one may begin hearing criticism that seems disconnected from reality. People may question your intentions, even when your actions were transparent. They may accuse you of creating problems that existed long before you entered the environment. In many cases, the system begins projecting its own instability onto the person who revealed it. By placing responsibility on you, the group avoids confronting the uncomfortable truth that the problem lies within the structure they built. This stage can feel deeply unfair. The chosen one may wrestle with frustration or disappointment, wondering why honesty and integrity seem to create conflict rather than respect. Yet this reaction reveals something important about the nature of systems built on silent compromise. They depend on cooperation to survive. When someone refuses to participate, the system must either change or attempt to remove the disruption. For many groups, the easier option is to isolate the person rather than transform the structure. Scripture shows that many individuals who followed God encountered this same pattern. Their obedience to truth placed them in conflict with environments that preferred comfort over integrity. They did not become targets because they were aggressive or confrontational. They became targets because their presence revealed what others preferred to ignore. The chosen one walks a similar path when they choose to live according to God's standards rather than human expectations. Over time, the realization begins to settle in. The reactions you are experiencing are not random hostility. They are the system defending itself. The criticism, the exclusion, and the misunderstandings are all attempts to restore the silence that once protected the group's patterns. When you understand this, the confusion begins fading. Instead of constantly questioning yourself, you begin recognizing the deeper dynamic at work. The chosen one did not create the instability in the system. You revealed it. And once something hidden has been exposed, the environment can no longer pretend that everything is functioning the way it once did. Being targeted is painful, but it also carries an important message. It shows how deeply the system depended on silence. The intensity of the reaction reveals how powerful truth can be when it enters a space built on compromise. While others may attempt to restore the old order by isolating you, God often uses these moments to prepare the chosen one for something greater. Because when the system pushes you away, it may be the very moment God begins redirecting you toward environments where truth is not treated as a threat, but as the foundation for growth. Chosen one, after the tension increases and the system begins reacting to the disruption your integrity created, there often comes a moment when everything feels as though it is shifting beneath your feet. The environment that once seemed stable suddenly becomes uncomfortable. Relationships begin changing, conversations feel strained, and opportunities that once appeared secure may start closing without explanation. At first, this stage can feel like rejection. You may question whether something went wrong, whether speaking honestly created consequences that could have been avoided if you had simply stayed silent. But over time, a deeper realization begins to form. What feels like rejection may actually be redirection. God often uses disruption to move the chosen one away from environments that were never meant to contain the fullness of their purpose. When systems depend on silent compromise to function, they eventually reach a point where someone who refuses to participate cannot remain there comfortably. The tension that grows is not always a sign of failure. It can be the signal that the season in that environment has reached its limit. The chosen one may initially resist this realization because leaving familiar spaces can feel unsettling. Even imperfect systems offer a sense of stability simply because they are known. Yet God sometimes allows conflict to expose the limitations of those systems so clearly that staying becomes impossible. In those moments, what once felt like a safe place reveals itself as an environment that could never support your growth beyond a certain point. The disruption becomes a form of clarity. You begin seeing patterns that were once hidden by routine. You recognize how many decisions in the system were guided by silent expectations rather than truth. You realize how much energy was spent maintaining appearances instead of pursuing genuine progress. This awareness can be uncomfortable because it forces you to acknowledge that the place you once trusted was built on fragile foundations. But it also creates freedom. The chosen one begins understanding that separation from these environments is not always a loss. Sometimes it is protection. God sees the direction your life is meant to move long before you do. When a system cannot grow with the calling placed on your life, remaining inside it would eventually restrict your potential. Disruption becomes the mechanism that breaks that limitation. What once felt like stability becomes clearly visible as confinement. The tension you experienced becomes the force that pushes you towards something new. Many chosen ones later look back at these moments of conflict and recognize them as turning points. At the time, the situation may have felt painful. Being misunderstood, excluded, or pushed aside can create deep disappointment. Yet once distance is created, perspective begins changing. You start noticing opportunities that were never visible while you were still inside the old structure. Conversations open with people who operate according to honesty rather than control. Environments appear where integrity is not treated as rebellion but as strength. The chosen one realizes that the disruption that once felt like rejection was actually clearing the path toward healthier spaces. Scripture repeatedly shows that God moved his servants away from environments that limited their calling. Separation was not punishment, it was preparation. When individuals remained faithful to truth, even when systems rejected them, God often led them toward places where their purpose could grow freely. The chosen one follows a similar pattern today. When you refuse to compromise your integrity, some environments will eventually push you out because they cannot accommodate the disruption you represent. Yet God often uses that very moment to guide you towards spaces where your values align with the culture around you. Distance also provides clarity. Once you are removed from the pressure of the old system, it becomes easier to see the patterns that once felt confusing. You begin recognizing how much energy was required to navigate invisible expectations. You realize how often honesty created tension simply because the environment was designed to avoid it. And with that clarity comes peace. The chosen one stops trying to repair systems that were never willing to change. Instead, you begin focusing on the direction God is opening in front of you. What once looked like rejection now reveals itself as a doorway. The disruption that forced separation becomes the beginning of a new chapter. And slowly, the chosen one understands that God never intended for you to remain inside environments that required silence to survive. He allowed the tension to rise so that the path forward would become unmistakably clear. Because sometimes, the greatest form of guidance God provides is not comfort inside a system that limits you, but disruption that leads you toward the place where your purpose can finally grow without compromise. Chosen one, once the disruption has done its work and distance forms between you and the system that once tried to contain you, something powerful begins happening within your life. At first, the separation may feel unfamiliar. You are no longer surrounded by the same expectations that once defined how conversations should unfold, how opinions should be expressed, or how decisions should be made. The silent pressure that once shaped your environment gradually fades, and in its place, a new awareness begins to grow. For the first time, you begin experiencing what it means to live without constantly adjusting yourself to satisfy rules that were never fair in the first place. This freedom does not appear instantly. In fact, the chosen one may initially feel the urge to keep explaining themselves, to keep justifying the choices that once disrupted the system. But as time passes, a deeper confidence begins replacing that instinct. You start realizing that you were never responsible for maintaining those invisible expectations. Your responsibility was simply to remain aligned with truth and integrity. The moment you stop trying to earn approval from systems built on compromise, your identity becomes anchored in something far more stable. Instead of measuring your worth through acceptance, you begin measuring your direction through purpose. This shift changes how the chosen one approaches every new environment they enter. Where you once felt pressure to blend into existing dynamics, you now carry a clearer sense of boundaries. You understand that integrity is not something to negotiate for the sake of comfort. If a system requires silence about wrongdoing, or demands loyalty to unfair patterns, you recognize the warning signs much earlier. The experiences you survived taught you how to identify environments where authenticity is welcome and environments where it becomes a threat. This awareness becomes one of the most valuable forms of wisdom the chosen one can carry forward. Freedom from invisible rules also transforms your relationships. When you no longer shape your behavior around hidden expectations, the connections that remain in your life begin reflecting honesty rather than control. People who value truth are naturally drawn to environments where integrity is respected. New relationships appear where open communication replaces manipulation, and where trust grows through transparency instead of pressure. The chosen one often discovers that once the old system releases its grip, healthier communities begin forming around the values you carried all along. These connections feel different because they are not built on silent compromise. They are built on mutual respect for authenticity. Another unexpected result of breaking free from these systems is the influence it creates for others who are still trapped within them. Your decision to step outside the invisible rules sends a signal that many people quietly notice. Some individuals who once believed those expectations were unavoidable begin realizing that another path exists. Your courage becomes a form of leadership, even if you never intended it to be. People observing your journey may start questioning the patterns they previously accepted without thought. They may begin asking themselves whether the rules they follow truly deserve their loyalty. In this way, the chosen one's freedom becomes a catalyst for change beyond their own life. What once made you a target eventually becomes a symbol of independence. Scripture describes truth as something that brings freedom to those who embrace it. When the chosen one chooses to live according to God's standards instead of human pressure, the weight of conformity begins falling away. The need to constantly prove yourself disappears because your direction is no longer determined by approval. Instead, your path becomes guided by purpose. The values that once created tension in restrictive environments now become the foundation of a life defined by clarity and integrity. This transformation reveals something important about the journey of the chosen one. The conflict you experienced was never simply about disagreement with individuals. It was about systems reacting to someone who refused to be controlled by silent expectations. By breaking those rules, you exposed their weakness, and by walking away from them, you discovered the freedom that comes from living according to truth rather than fear. Over time, the chosen one begins seeing that the disruption which once created so much tension was actually the doorway to a more authentic life. The rejection you felt in one environment becomes the reason you found a place where your values could finally grow without resistance. And the courage you demonstrated by standing in integrity becomes the very quality that allows you to lead others toward the same freedom. Because when the chosen one stops living by invisible rules designed to maintain compromise, they begin living according to a purpose shaped by God. And that kind of freedom is something no system can ever take away. Chosen one, if this message reached you today, remember that being targeted does not mean you were wrong. Sometimes it simply means you refuse to follow rules that were never built on truth. The tension you experienced was not a sign that you failed to fit in. It was often proof that God set you apart for something different. When you choose integrity over silent compromise, systems that depend on control will react. But your strength comes from walking in truth, not from satisfying their expectations. If this message spoke to your journey, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who may be facing the same situation, and subscribe to the channel for more messages created for the chosen ones, walking their path with God.